failure is not an option. What a great mantra. It was spoken or at least credited to this person, Gene Kranz. But do you know why? Because Gene Kranz works for NASA, and he was in charge of things like Apollo 13 and making sure that massive rockets could go into space and land safely on places like the moon. So failure not being an option makes a ton of sense. Other places where it might make a lot of sense for failure, say, not to be an option is life and death surgery. Or if, for example, you were going to try, say, skydiving, I'd say failure should not be an option. However, in business, it doesn't equal progress to have a mantra like failure is not an option. In fact, if anything, it's going to cause paralysis instead of progress. It gets said all the time. We're in a competitive landscape, things are changing faster than ever, and we've got to keep up with the pace. And so we would imagine that progress should be first and foremost on most everybody's mind, and yet individuals, teams, organizations, they're not pressing up against their limits. I think in large part because they're afraid to fail, afraid to take some risk. You know what I think is a much more effective orientation? I think it's summed up nicely in a quote by John F. Kennedy. Many years ago when he said, "There are risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long-range risks and costs to comfortable inaction." In both cases, there's going to be risks and costs. And I find that most people think of the costs and risks associated with action, but very rarely do they think of the costs and risks of inaction. What happens if you don't act? What happens if you let your competitors catch up? What happens if they get farther out ahead? What happens if other people in their careers are learning and growing and you're staying stagnant? One of the traps that I think people can fall into when it comes to failing is I think they orient to it sometimes as if it's binary. Like you can fail or you don't fail, and it's absolute in nature. That hasn't been my experience at all. In fact, my experience has been quite different, and that is that it's a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum is to avoid failing altogether. I see this happen in a few different ways, but a couple of the main ones is when a culture doesn't embrace failing and actually makes it unsafe. Whether they berate somebody who fails, or it feels a little bit like a game of whack-a-mole in the company where if you stand up or stand out, bam, you're going to get hit if you failed, so nobody's willing. They're just going to avoid failing by avoiding trying. The other way that I see it happen is maybe they try to fail-proof the company. Failure is not an option, like I said before. But in that one, once again, in most businesses, failure is an option. Why would you play it so safe? If you're not failing, you're probably not pressing yourself enough. So that's one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, there's taking blind risks, which I also tend not to recommend. People shouldn't just be taking risks because of bravado. No risk, no returns. And while there's truth to that, there can be something different than just taking risk for risk's sake. We don't take risks just to take risks. We take risks to produce rewards and returns. And if these are the two extremes, what's this expansive area in the middle? It's what I call failing smart. Getting really good at failing in order to push yourself to make progress. And I've found three things especially helpful when considering failing smart. One is to check the mindset. The next one is to check the action set. And then lastly, to create a rule set. The rules for engagement for how to fail smart in your organization and your teams. And that's what we're covering in this TVT. Episode number 4, Fail Proof versus Fail Smart. So let's set NēXTpectations with failing smart. Certainly it's going to apply to life, but today I want to talk about career and business. Let me bring back that quote from John F. Kennedy and remind everyone that risks and costs are associated with taking action, but they're also associated with comfortable inaction. So if you're going to have to face the risks and costs of either one of them, then what do we focus on? I suggest we focus on the outcomes, or the returns we can produce on failing, or what I'll call ROF, return on fail. No, that's not a real term. It's probably an Ericism. But I'm going to use it here because we can actually produce a return, believe it or not, from failing. Let's say you've got a plan where you're trying to get from where you are today to some place in the future with new capabilities. And as you're marching down this plan, boom, something happens. It didn't go exactly as planned. Now, some people might stop right there and go, well, this is why we never try anything new. Boom, right there, there's the fail. But we're trying to fail smart, and we want to return on fail. Well, there's the fail. So how do we produce a return? Well, the first thing we can do is recognize, well, maybe that's going to teach us something. What can we learn from that? And maybe what that does is it says, okay, maybe we can't get past that fail to get to here, but what if we could set a new trajectory that's perhaps even better to get to our goal because of what it is we learned from this experience? Let's say you're marching along the path and boom, there's your fail. And you realize, maybe this wasn't such a good idea to begin with. Oh, I know. There's lots of people out there that'll say, never give up. It just sounds so cool. Bull. In business, you can give up. You can produce a return by learning that maybe that wasn't such a good idea to begin with. Maybe what you discovered is this path to getting to that point wasn't a great path. And maybe you find a new path that gets you to this point instead. Perhaps what you find out is trying to get to this spot was never a great strategy to begin with, and you create a whole new strategy that takes you somewhere else entirely. That's totally acceptable too. Let me share with you some actionable insights I found helpful when trying to produce a return on fail. Remember, I liken failure to being much more like a spectrum than like a certain binary on-off switch? Well, Fail Smart in that spectrum had 3 sets that I presented at the beginning. The first one is, how do we have the right mindset? The second one is, how do we create the right action set? And the third one is, what's an appropriate rule set? Try these 3 on. We're going to cover all 3 of these right now, and I'm going to take us through them, and you can see if any of these are a great fit for how to change your culture into being fail smart. Let's start with mindset. The first one I'll share with you is, failing does not equal failure. Just because we fail doesn't mean we're failures. Get out of that mindset. No need to beat yourself up. Going after progress, going after NēXTpectations means we're going to fail sometimes. It's just part of the process. The second one is, failing is rarely final and it's rarely fully. What I mean by that is that when we fail, it's not the end of the game. Just like I showed you in a couple of those examples earlier, that might be new learning and new trajectories we can take. Or maybe we say we're not going to do that one anymore and we're going to do something else. Don't think of it like some final or ultimate set of circumstances. It's just an interim one. The other thing I found is that rarely do we fail fully. It's not been my experience. What I found instead is that there are certain places that even when we fail, we picked up some new capability sets we didn't have before. The third one is it's not easy and it's not for everyone. If you have a large organization or really established culture, not everyone's going to automatically just embrace this new fail-ready, fail-smart notion of how to go into the future and take more risks. You may find that certain teams of folks will really embrace this and other teams will really resist it, or maybe just feel uncomfortable and need a demonstration over time. We've had folks in our company when we set new values in one of our organizations to say, drive innovation. What we found is a big subset of those people would say, well, I'm not the innovative type. I'm not that creative. I wouldn't know what to do there. And really, from my point of view, they're saying, I don't feel comfortable taking the kind of risk necessary to innovate because I'm not confident in it. What we ended up having to do is change our value from driving innovation for that particular set of teams to driving improvement. And when we did driving improvement, they could handle that one. They felt like they could incrementally change things, but something about innovation made them nervous, made them scared. We're still working on that transition in certain teams. In other teams, it's worked out just fine. Driving innovation and going and pressing ourselves against our limits and being willing to fail and get things wrong on our way to getting things right is really embraced. And so just recognize, in our culture especially, you're going to find some people aren't going to take to it. Organizations and competitors and individuals in their careers that you're having to compete with, if they're not willing to embrace this and it's not for them, it'll be a competitive advantage if you can make it work for you. And the fourth one is you have to get comfortable being a little bit uncomfortable, meaning this idea of putting yourself out there and failing, of course it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for almost anyone. You do train yourself out of that discomfort over time if you create a safe to fail environment. All right, now let's shift it from mindset to action set. And in order to talk about the first action set that I want you to consider, I want to borrow from a quote from Nelson Mandela, where he says, I never lose. I either win or I learn. So what's the first thing you want to do in an action set to get a return on fail? It's going to be to learn. And when you learn, you need to learn what to start and learn what to stop. The second action step you can begin to audition is inventory. Inventory your starts, what you're going to start, your stops, what you're going to stop, and partial wins. What do I mean by partial wins? I alluded to it earlier. What I mean by a partial win is I mean new capabilities. Because once again, I fail all the time because I'm in charge of new initiatives for most of my organizations. Building things that never have existed before from what we envision means we're going to fail on our way to trying to get it right. And the thing that I have found is that when I fail, oftentimes I've picked up new capabilities, either for myself and what I've learned, or for my teams and what they've learned. And the idea is to make sure that we learn our new capability sets. And you can't wield the tool you don't know you have. So you need to inventory your new capabilities as well as the things you learned about what to start and what to stop. Now you got to pick your course of action. Are you going to refine and resume on your path? Are you going to refine and restart because that wasn't a good approach? Or are you just going to cut the losses and head another direction entirely? And one of my favorite demonstrations of getting a return on fail is never fail the same way twice. It's actually one of my mantras in failing. When people fail on my team, they know they're safe to fail smart, but I make sure that they understand you can never fail the same way twice. Meaning, if you really did learn it, and you really did inventory it, and you now are clear, you shouldn't fail that way again. Might find new ways to fail smart, but it won't be that way. And that's great because that means we're even more capable than we were before. Let's demonstrate it, and let's not get upset about the fail, but let's produce our return on fail by never failing that way again. Now let's switch from action set to rule set. Whether you're using these rules for yourself or you're working with teams, when I'm doing this, I like to create these ground rules for how to fail, so that I never beat myself up and I never beat team members up when they fail smart. And these are the rules I ask of everybody, including myself. The first ground rule is fail responsibly. You're going to fail from time to time. The thing to remember is to stay responsible for producing a return on fail. The second ground rule is fail aligned. Know the bigger why, whether it's for yourself or your supervisor or the teams or the organization. There's some reason you're on this path to begin with if you're aligned with that purpose. And what I've found is this goes to the partial wins. If you do fail, but you failed aligned, you probably failed in the right direction. So the new capability sets you picked up in the partial wins probably align with the organization's desire to keep progressing as you keep going. So don't go rogue and create your own path and then you fail in the wrong direction. Fail in the right direction, the direction that takes care of what you were trying to head towards to begin with. Let me use football as a quick metaphor. If you follow football at all, you know that it takes 10 yards to get a first down, and a first down lets you keep on going. So if you've got to do a running play and you can carry the ball 4 yards per carry, you're going to get to keep on going. Well, the people who are the running backs in the game, they know that they got to get to that 4 yards. That's their goal. But let's say they start getting 2 yards on the run and they trip or they get tackled, fail. But if they start falling and they fall in the correct direction, which is towards the touchdown, they may get the other 2 yards of the 4 simply by falling in the right direction. So if you are failing aligned, you're going to still produce outcomes with new capabilities that were in the right direction. And the third one is fail sustainably. If you're going to fail in a way you can recover. If you burn yourself out and then you never want to work on the project again, that's not sustainable. If you blew the entire budget on something you had no idea could work or not, then you have nothing left over to try another way. So as you're working through failing, fail in a way that's recoverable. Fail in a way that lets you live to succeed another day. All too often what I see out there are people that are trying to avoid failing. Maybe they're trying to create that fail-proof culture or mindset. And I think what they're going to find is it's going to be progress-proof. What I would have you consider is this quote from Wayne Gretzky, famous hockey player and arguably one of the best competitive athletes of all time, who said, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." So start taking some shots. Start failing smart. Try on and see if the mindsets, the action sets, and the rule sets that I shared help you to do that, whether for yourself, your teams, or your organization. And that's this episode of TVT, Fail Proof versus Fail Smart. And until next time, set NēXTpectations. I can't help but wonder if people, what I've noticed is there's really two fundamental ways.